All right. Well, welcome. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Eleanor Hines. I am your North-Sound Baykeeper lead scientist at Resources, and I'm really excited to have Lee First joining us here this evening. I met Lee first a few years before I had the pleasure of working with her at Resources, where she was our pollution prevention specialist and North-Sound Baykeeper. She also worked for a time with the Spokane River Keeper and now has founded the twin Harbor Waterkeeper out in Gray's Harbor, which is definitely needs someone like Lee so they can fight issues like this proposed dam. Lee sure knows how to paddle and how to have a great adventure, having explored much more of our watersheds than most people. In fact, she just returned from another paddle of the Chehalis covering 105 miles in 5 days. I hope that you all have some important takeaways from this presentation, and will submit your own comments on the draft environmental impact statement if you haven't already, after this presentation. And so without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Lee First this afternoon, our twin harbor waterkeeper. And I apologize for any technical difficulties in the meantime. Lee, let me know if you need anything. I think you're on mute too. Still on mute. Oh, sorry. I tried to unmute you.
All right. There, now I think it's working. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. And I recognize a few names there on the side. So thank you all for tuning in on your Tuesday afternoon. Oops, let's see here. Yeah, so as Eleanor said, I am the Twin Harbors Waterkeeper, and I've been out here, I'm based in Aberdeen, and I've been out here on the job for about 1.5 years. My area here that I advocate for and protect is the Chehalis watershed, Grays Harbor, Elwha Bay, and all the rivers that drain into those estuaries. So what waterkeepers do is they advocate and educate and protect their area. There's a few key issues out here that I'm working on, and one of the really big ones is this proposed dam at the headwaters of the Chehalis. So without any further ado, I'll just get started here. And I have about 30 slides. And I'm fine with people just asking questions, or however Eleanor wants to moderate this is just fine. Before I get going, I want to show this map. The area in gray is what the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis consider their homeland territory. And I've met with the historic preservation staff at the Chehalis Tribes several times. I asked them for a homeland statement, and they gave me this and encouraged me to share it. It's a paragraph, and I'm going to read it. In the memory of our people, there has not been a time when we did not live on this land, nurtured by the bounty of Nsulips, the Chehalis River, which means our wealth water. The wealth of our people comes from the river, wealth meaning material resources, history, identity, spiritual connection, and the continuation of this knowledge and lifeways. Our people have a distinct understanding of how to coexist with this river. Why the effects of flooding are viewed negatively, our ancestors understood this process to be the natural replenishment of nutrients to the fertile prairies that provided the foods and medicines that sustained our people for thousands of years. So you can see on this map, there's a lot of little place names on the right-hand side, and then you can also see that the Quinault Reservation is to the north and on the coast from the main watershed of the Chehalis River. But Grays Harbor and the lower Chehalis River is in the usual and accustomed treaty fishing rights of the Quinault reservation. So both of these tribes are salmon people and depend very much on the fish that are part of this watershed. So probably everyone remembers the 2007 flood that happened. This is a photo of the freeway and looking north from the Chehalis area towards Centralia. So this was a devastating flood, and many, many people lost houses, property. You know, there was massive flooding. This was the worst flood in modern record. And, you know, these floods are happening more frequently. They're getting worse, and there's many, many factors to these worsening floods, and I'm going to talk about those. So I just want to acknowledge that you know, this flood cost $900 million worth of damage in this area. I-5 was closed for about 4 days. That's a huge economic hit. And so you can't blame the residents of this area for wanting to be protected from floods. But, you know, I'm just going to come out and say right now, I am against this dam. And I think that, you know, the proponent of this project wants flood control. And in my opinion, you know, there is no such thing as flood control. We should be working towards flood resiliency. And so about 10 years ago, the Office of the Chehalis Basin was created. And this is an office that was created by Governor Inslee. It might not have been quite 10 years ago, but it's a Department of Ecology office, and it has a staff, and it has a dual goal, which is to consider long-term, large-scale strategies to reduce flood damage while improving aquatic habitat in the Chehalis Basin. And so in the last, I guess, 7 months or so, these two major reports have come out of this office. The document on the left is the Aquatic Species Restoration Plan, which is a very robust document that talks about all the restoration projects and possibilities that should be undertaken to restore all sorts of aquatic species and not just salmon. And the document on the right is the draft the state environmental impact statement that just came out in late February of 2020. And it is it's extremely long. I think it's about 3,500 pages, including all the appendices. So what this document does is it describes what the impacts of the project will be, and it's very detailed. And there's also a very good summary document that's about 17 pages long, and this document can be found on the Chehalis Basin Strategy website. And this is a more kind of normal map of the Chehalis Basin. It's a really interesting basin. It's the largest watershed that's completely within the state of Washington. And it has the healthiest salmon and steelhead runs of any river in Washington. It has no endangered salmonids. It has major tributaries that you can see here, and its headwaters are in the PL Hills down south. It's got the headwaters are both the east and the west fork that are south of PL there, and the south fork of the Chehalis, and it makes kind of a giant C shape. And I like to describe it as a river that doesn't know where it's going, because it goes south, it goes east, it goes south some more, then it goes west, then it goes north, and then it empties out into our large estuary at Aberdeen, Grays Harbor. And there's many tributaries also that come in from, well, several from the Cascades and a bunch from the Olympics. And this is a map that you might be more familiar with. So this shows where I-5 goes through Centralia and Chehalis, and any of you that have been on this stretch of I-5 have probably only seen this very little corner of the river, but there's so much more of it, starting up here in the headwaters above PL. So this this large pink thing south of PL here, this shows the impounded water that will be the part-time reservoir if a dam is built. So the dam will be just a couple miles south of the town of PL. And also this other pink thing is part of the project. It's a proposed levee that goes around the commercial area of Chehalis and the Chehalis Centralia airport. So there is an existing levee there, and they, the proponent, who is the Lewis County Flood Control District, wants to raise that levee from 4 to 7 feet above what it is now. So as Eleanor said, I am a paddler. I've been paddling since I was 11. And I've been on probably 30 expeditions in canoes and kayaks all over the Northwest and Alaska. So when I became the waterkeeper here, I had to see my river. And I collected a few other paddle fanatics. And last May, we went down the river from the Highway 6 bridge in PL, and we went all the way down to Aberdeen. And I believe that rivers teach us. So the main reason, you know, I wanted to see the whole river is that my job is to protect this river. And by seeing the whole river, I'm more able to do that. And I also learn, it's amazing the lessons you can learn by traveling down a river. And, you know, one thing you can learn about is the geology, and the geology of this river is fascinating. It's such a privilege to be able to see how it changes. The headwaters are a beautiful basalt gorge, which I'll show you some pictures of, and the river really changes from, the geology changes from this, you know, very, very old basalt to alluvium, and, you know, and then it's very silty as you travel down. And, you know, the learning from, you know, watching the land uses and looking at the vegetation and thinking about all the uses, all the ways that we've used the river is very contemplative. So this is just, I don't know, 10 miles down from PL, and the river is small. The riparian vegetation is very healthy. You know, there's no homes or farms within view of the river, although there are plenty of people. You know, there is a town of PL, and there's a town of Dodie, and there's a town of Adna, but you hardly see anything from the river. It looks like a wilderness river. And, you know, nobody paddles this river. And one of the reasons that nobody paddles it is there's no public access. The upper half of the river has no public access. So in order for us to launch at that place, I just went around to some homeowners and asked them if it's okay if I drag some canoes down their bank, and they said yes. And so that's what we did. But, you know, for people to be able to love their river, they have to be able to get to it. And so, so we continued downstream, and there was places like this where it really makes you think about the power of those floods that came through. You know, this is a huge rack of logs that was probably deposited here in 2007 during that big flood. And you know, places like this, you can see that the river has a floodplain. It's connected to its floodplain. It has the ability to, when the water is high, it has large areas of wetlands and floodplains for the water to fill in and sink into the ground. And many places of the river don't have that. But up in there are places in the upper river and then the lower river where the river is connected to its floodplain, and that's a really good thing, because rivers flood, and flooding actually brings a lot of benefit to a river. Flooding redistributes gravel. It provides wood that salmon need for refugia and resting places. And so, you know, historically, this river was very different. It had massive amount of wood in it, and it had, you know, it had a lot of meanders, and it, you know, but it's really changed. And in many places now, the river is not able to access its floodplain because there's cities and houses, and the river looks quite different downstream. So we continue downstream, and this is on the left. You can see that you know, we're out of the basalt area. We're into an area of alluvium where, you know, thousands of years there's been sediment deposits, and there's also less riparian area. There's less vegetation on the banks. There's cattle in some areas, which cause problems. You know, not only does their manure pollute the river, but they trample the riverbanks and kill the vegetation and add sediment to the river and all that kind of thing. So there's more and more of this as we went downstream. And so thinking about what we use the river for, you know, this isn't unique to the Chehalis River, but there's so many things that we use the river for. So we've already, the last couple slides, we see that, you know, we use it for agriculture. We irrigate with the water. We use it for transportation. And so there's, most of the way along the Chehalis River, there are either active or old railroad beds. And so huge levees have been built up, and, you know, there's roads, and, you know, a lot of alterations have been made for transportation. And there's been gravel mining. There's waste disposal. You know, we use the river to put our treated sewage in. We use it to dispose of industrial stormwater. You know, homeowners, this is getting rarer, but for many, many years, homeowners armored their shorelines like this. This is rather recent, but, you know, of course a property owner wants to protect their property from erosion, but doing this kind of thing just makes the problems for your downhill neighbors worse. And so when I see these kind of things and the cattle, I take a GPS point and some photos, and I send them. I file a complaint, and I expect that one or other state agency will respond to the complaint and go deal with the landowner, and, you know, make them fix it, or at least educate them about why this is a bad idea. And so immediately downstream from that pile of concrete is a house that is now in the river. This is the, you know, this is part of the problem that flooding causes. And you know, the flooding is, I still haven't talked about some of the causes of the flooding. You know, an obvious one is climate change, but less obvious ones are development in the floodplain, and forest practices, and those kind of things. So, you know, this house, which is now in the river, is downstream of Centralia. And, you know, many, many projects of riprapping the river and confining the river to its or not allowing the river to expand into the floodplain results in water with a lot more velocity, and that causes a lot more erosion downstream, and that's the reason that this house is in the river now. And so most of you, I'm sure, have gone through Centralia and Chehalis and seen the development that's in the floodplain there. And you know, there's large box stores there, including Walmart, and some of them are brand new. This area is, you know, it's been growing, and this is all fill, and this is right next to the river. And this is the area of which the proposed levee will partially surround this area. So there already is a levee, but they want to, but part of this project is to increase the height of this levee. And so one day I went to a meeting in Chehalis, and I had a little bit of extra time, so I'd never really been to this area before. So I took an hour and walked around, and I was rather surprised at what I saw, which was at least 15 properties that are for sale. And some of them are already built up, like there's a building pad there on the lower left, and there's, it's all platted out, you know, it probably has all the utilities, and then the sign, the retail space. So, you know, so, I guess it's Lewis County or City of Chehalis is actively looking to sell more of this property that's in the floodplain, and to build on this property there on the right-hand side, you know, that will need to be filled. And so that's gonna continue to add problems in flooding. You know, I'm gonna take a second here to read from my favorite article by Linda Mapes, who's the fantastic reporter for the Seattle Times. So she wrote a great article for the Seattle Times right after the 2007 flood. So she says this, in 1996, the worst flood Lewis County has ever known blew through, drowning communities in muddy water high enough to close Interstate 5. Since then, the county has granted more than 100 permits for new development in the floodplain. The cities of Centralia and Chehalis added to the rush. Big box stores, restaurants, strip malls galore, a railroad line extension, parking lots for a church, a coal unloading facility, new natural gas pipelines, a mine expansion, and barns, homes, carports, and shop, all built in the floodplain. And then we had this flood in 2007. So the flood in 2007, it rained 16 inches in 36 hours up there in PL, in what we call the Willapa Hills. And that area gets 120 inches of rain a year. And so, so this is just a bad situation. And this basin desperately needs flood resiliency. But many of us think that we need solutions that meet local needs rather than simply bulking up protection for interstate commerce on I-5. And so when I walked around this area, it really made sense to me. And I saw, I don't know, 5 or 6 brand new buildings, and they're just building them up higher and higher. And they're, you know, brand new Les Schwab, a brand new Dutch coffee, and, you know, more and more and more stuff for sale. And this is where the river ends up. This is the port of Grays Harbor. This is the grain loading facility, Terminal 2 at the port of Grays Harbor, where soybeans are loaded onto mega ships and sent off overseas. And this is a place where there's been industrial development for 100 years. 150 years, and you know, there's no natural shoreline on the north side. You know, this is a gauntlet for salmon that are running upstream, and And this is the beginning of the estuary, one of the places where, you know, there's, the economy is really dependent on shellfish farming here. And so now this is the part of my presentation where I bounce back and forth, and I'm really sorry, but I want to show you what the headwaters look like. This is the Willapa Hills in the area where the upstream of where the dam will be built. And this photo was taken 6 months ago by Shane Anderson, who's a videographer who has just come out with a full-length documentary about the Chehalis, and it happens to be the debut was Sunday night, and it's free viewing now for a week. And so I'll let you know what the link is for that. But Shane took this picture to kind of illustrate the conditions in the headwaters. And, you know, keep in mind that this area has 120 inches of rain a year. It's the wettest part of the watershed. A lot of it has been logged 3 times. The soil is very friable and erodible. And this area had over 1,200 landslides during that 2007 flood, which was a rain on snow event. So it was also described as an atmospheric river. That's 16 inches of rain in 36 hours hitting on snow just caused devastation. And this is one unit in that area of the headwaters. And 27% of this one unit slid down to bedrock. And that's because the rotation of the timber in the industrial forest lands, which are mostly owned by Weyerhaeuser, is between 30 and 40 years. So, you know, the trees are only grown 30 or 40 years. And within that amount of time, they don't have enough root strength to hold on to the soil. And there's been studies that show that trees have to be at least 50 years old to hold on to the soil and prevent landslides of this magnitude during heavy rain events. And I'm going to read a little bit more from the Linda Mapes article. Steeply dipping bedrock is covered by thin soils and is prone to landslides. 98% of the mapped landslide processes were associated with forest practices that have occurred in the last 50 years, and almost half were associated with forest practices that have occurred in the last 15 years. In contrast, no landslides were mapped on stands over 50 years of age. Yeah, so this brought, this is from Linda's article. Floodwater high up on the Chehalis stripped gargantuan loads of silt and timber off the hills and dumped it along with the water that swamped homes, garages, and barns to depths of 12 feet in some upriver communities, far above levels anyone can remember. In one large clear cut alone, nearly a dozen slides emptied into a creek. In some areas, log jams may have acted like small dams, temporarily holding back water until they toppled over or breached. Some upriver communities got slammed with the mess when the floodwater moved on all the way to the cities of Centralia and Chehalis and the development in the floodplain along I-5. So this is what it looked like. This is Stillman Creek, which is a tributary of the South Fork of the Chehalis. And this is what the debris from those landslides looked like when it reached the agricultural area of the South Fork of the Chehalis, where there's a lot of smaller farms and agriculture. So, you know, this type of material is what damaged all the bridges and roads and, you know, just caused massive problems downstream. And so the EIS, the draft environmental impact statement, came out at the end of February. And it's very long, but it's very interesting. And it says in it that there will be, it evaluates the impacts of the proposed dam and the levee. It does not grant permission to build the project, but it's a massive tome of information about the impacts. And so it says in it that there will be probable significant impacts of all these things: cultural resources, tribal resources, air quality, earth, wetlands, environmental health and safety, environmental justice, fish, aquatic species, land use, wildlife species and habitats. And I'm going to talk about just a couple of these things in more detail. Impacts to cultural and tribal resources. This is really a huge hit. If this dam goes in, it's a huge hit for the Chehalis people. If a dam this is right in the area where the dam will be built, a couple miles south of PL. It is a stunningly beautiful place. So constructing the dam at this spot will affect 4 archaeological sites and reservoir inundation. So there will be a reservoir behind it, will affect 9 sites. The airport levee changes will affect 8 archaeological sites. And so I don't know how that would possibly be mitigated. There's going to be, if the project happens, there's going to be a massive concrete structure here, and then the cultural sites upstream will be inundated with over 200 feet of water. Impacts to fish and aquatic species. So I have not talked much about the fish, but these are fall Chinook in the Headwater Gorge, immediately upstream of the dam site. So these are these are genetically unique salmon and steelhead, and these fish are dependent on the spawning grounds that are above the dam site. So these fish are already really suffering. And although the Chehalis in most years has the healthiest fish runs of any river in Washington, there's been a decline of between 80 and 90% of these fish, and the spring Chinook are in the most trouble of all. And steelhead, the Chehalis is kind of known as Washington's steelhead river. 16% of the steelhead in the Chehalis spawn above the dam site. So that is a huge thing. There are other Chinook and steelhead in other tributaries. There's some in the Skookumchuck, there's some in the Wynoochee, and there are other places where there are Chinook and steelhead, but these are genetically unique fish. This is what the river looks like now. This is Crim Creek. This is the first tributary that comes in above where the proposed dam site is. And I look at this picture and it brings tears to my eyes, which I know is really corny, but I have spent so many years trying to get buffers and riparian areas on streams. And I look at this picture and, this is salmon heaven. This stream this picture is from the winter, but in the summer, this stream is completely shaded, and there's all kinds of wood that can fall into the stream, and this is an area where steelhead and Chinook spawn, and it really doesn't get any better than that. So, and this kind of habitat is what's keeping the Chehalis River cool. And a lot of the Chehalis River is suffering from high temperatures, and the temperatures in many of the downstream areas get to be lethal for fish. And so, you know, we need these cold water refugia. These are really important. And if the dam gets built, this area, when the dam is deployed, and I'll talk about that in a second, this area will be covered by 200 feet of water, and all these trees will be logged and removed. So, so that is a huge loss. Yeah, and there is a TMDL on the Chehalis River for temperature and dissolved oxygen, and so we desperately need these places where there is cold water. Many impacts, significant and unavoidable adverse impacts to wetlands and stream buffers. So construction of the dam and the levee would have significant adverse impacts on 6.5 acres of wetlands and 214 acres of wetland buffer habitat in the temporary reservoir area. And then the reservoir itself, the stream buffers will be gone on 18 miles of stream, and 312 acres of stream buffers will be removed, totally gone. And the DEIS states that impacts will be significant and unavoidable unless mitigation is feasible. And I don't know how you'd possibly mitigate for removing, 312 acres of stream buffers and all this wetland impact. There's also a huge impact to recreation. This is a slide. The upper 14 miles of the Chehalis above the dam site is one of the most prized Class 3 whitewater rivers in the state of Washington. And there's also a lot of steelhead fishermen that hike all the way up there to fish. So this is a significant and unavoidable and unmitigatable impact if this project happens. And so this is what the dam will look like. A lot of the proponents, they don't call this a dam. A dam is a bad word. They call it an FRE, Flood Retention Expandable Facility. And it's an expandable facility because they're proposing to build it with an enlarged base so that it can be raised in the future. And it's an unusual kind of a new design. You can see down at the bottom there, it's got during non-flooding times, the river will flow through the bottom of it unobstructed. This facility is estimated to cost $628 million. And there's no clear funding strategy. So, the state of, we're on the hook to pay for this. It's not, this kind of structure has not been demonstrated. It's unclear whether fish will actually be able to pass through the bottom of it, since this hasn't been done before. And it is coming, the design calls for a fish passage facility and a trap and haul facility. And it's estimated that this will take 5 years to build it. And so during the 5-year construction window, it's going to have a tunnel. They're going to build a tunnel for the water to get around the construction site. And there's going to be massive amount of roads built, all the logging upstream to get the reservoir ready. It's going to have several large quarries, and a huge amount of water will be needed to mix and wash the concrete. And the Chehalis is already over allocated. So it already has serious, dry spells in the summertime and not enough water for irrigation downstream. So, you know, this is a real quandary here. How are they, you know, how much water are they gonna need? And, you know, how much pollution is gonna be caused by 5 years of construction? It's unfathomable that, that there won't be, you know, really, really serious construction impacts from this thing. And, you know, back to the expandable facility, there's some question about the legality of this. And it's my understanding that under SEPA, a draft environmental impact statement cannot falsely segment a project that is in fact one big project. So, so it really worries me that this is proposed with a beefy foundation that can be raised later. And so this is what the reservoir will look like. 6 miles where there is now that most beautiful stream. You know, the river will be during times of flood. So this structure is only going to be like engaged during major and catastrophic floods. And so there's many CFS, cubic feet per second gauges on the Chehalis River, and there's one at Grand Mound. And so the documents say that when the CFS at the Grand Mound gauge is predicted to hit 38,000 CFS, the gates on the dam will be closed, and then the water will back up, and it'll be kept in this reservoir for about a month until the flooding danger is gone, and then the water will be slowly metered out. And why this water is in the reservoir, you know, it will likely get warmer. It'll suffer from oxygen depletion. It'll, you know, what was beautiful clean water is going to be harmed. And so what, you know, we want a more effective long-term solution. We want flood resiliency, and we don't want to take a chance with those salmon. And one of the reasons that we're so protective of these salmon is that our orca whales don't have enough food in Puget Sound. So they've been spending more and more time off the coast of Washington, out of Puget Sound, feeding on salmon like those from the Chehalis River. So this is a complicated, you know, story to tell, and there's so many reasons not to build this dam. There's so many things that we can do instead. And one thing that is really important to consider is that this dam is not going to benefit everybody in the Chehalis Basin. It's primarily going to benefit that section between Chehalis and Centralia. It's going to benefit that area in the floodplain, and I think, you know, in my opinion, building a dam that's going to protect that area in the floodplain is like a ticket to encourage more development. So, you know, how are we going to ensure that once this area is protected to some extent, that the building in the floodplain is not just continued with abandoned? You know, that's our biggest fear. And this is what the Elwha Dam looked like, the reservoir upstream of the Elwha Dam immediately after the breaching. So think about, so if we, you know, they're only saying that dam will be deployed every 7 years, but it's because of climate change, you know, it's likely to be deployed more often than that, probably every 3 to 4 years. And so, you know, there's no vegetation that will be able to withstand a month of inundation. And so what is a forest and a pretty healthy area now will probably look like this when the reservoir is emptied. And so this is going to contribute a lot of silt, you know, and the warm water, you know, there's going to be erosion. It's going to cause, you know, it's going to be massively different from what it is now. And some of us don't think that the EIS accounts for this properly. So I'm done. Let's see. Oh, good. It's quarter of. I hope that you will consider writing some comments. And I know that Eleanor has a couple of really good comment letters. I've given her some comments. There's comments from the CELP, the Center for Environmental Law and Policy that that we have to share. There's, I can provide all, you know, 20 pages of talking points. And I'm really happy to share. And the comment period ends on May 27th. And you can comment, there's a couple ways. There's an online comment form. You can send your comments in. On the Chehalis Basin Strategy website, there's a link for submitting comments, and both of those big documents that I mentioned are there, and you know, reams and reams of other older documents are there. So do, you know, if you have the time and the interest, you could spend the next 6 months reading about this, but do try to get some comments in by May 27th. And then the other really cool thing is Shane Anderson's film, A Watershed Moment, is available for free viewing right now, and it is fantastic. And if you would like to keep in touch with us, you can find out more about us at twinharborswaterkeeper.org or email me at lee@twinharborswaterkeeper. And with that, I think I'll open it up for questions.
So there are a few questions and comments already in the chat box. And so if folks want to use the raise hand function, feel free to do so. Otherwise, you can add it to the chat box, or if you really can't figure it out, feel free to unmute yourself and just talk, as long as there's not a total free-for-all and we can't understand what anyone's trying to say. But one of the first comments here was from Charles. I think it was when you were talking about some of the natural disturbances like flooding and fires and whatnot. But he said flooding and fires are natural disturbances that are needed to maintain a safe ecology. And then he also asked, I think this is when you were talking about the FRE, I'm sorry if I got that acronym wrong, the dam. Is this publicly funded?
There is no clear funding mechanism yet. So the Office of the Chehalis Basin gets legislative appropriations, and there's funding for the continued study and the engineering and all the consultants and, you know, the department. It's just a massive, massive amount of funding. And there's no funding for construction yet. So construction is actually probably, you know, 10 years away. And so the funding is a real unknown. And, you know, we want to just stop this thing in its tracks. You know, the state is having a fiscal emergency right now. And, you know, this seems like it should be the least at the bottom of the list to fund this. It is, you know, we don't even know if it'll work. You know, it's probably, you know, it's unlikely that this will work. And it doesn't benefit everyone in the basin, so.
The next comment came from Jennifer, from the Quadant's comment on the draft EIS, quote, the Washington legislature delegated to the Office of the Chehalis Basin and its Oversight Board the responsibility to aggressively pursue implementation of an integrated strategy and administer funding for long-term flood damage reduction and aquatic species restoration in the Chehalis River Basin, RCW and there's a link if folks want to check that out. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add there.
Yeah, so both the Chehalis tribe and the Quinault tribe recently came out against the dam, and the Quinault have an excellent, very long document of comments, and I have access to they're on a public website, and thankfully at the last Chehalis Basin meeting, the chair of the Chehalis Basin strategy, Vicki Rains, actually came out and said that, you know, we need a plan B. And we were very happy to hear that, because the draft EIS does not really have a plan B. It doesn't have an alternative to the dam. So, you know, we think it's really important to have a plan B.
Great. Next comment is from Karen. Such stupidity. They log and they build in the floodplain. If they have trouble with flooding, it's on them. It's not up to us to fund a stupid project that harms the environment and encourages further stupidity. Do you have any comments on that?
I love it, actually. I tried to be a little more diplomatic, which is not my forte.
I'm scrambling to find which one is the best one. Do you have a recommended URL for talking points so that people can maybe steal some stuff to put into their own comments?
Yes, I would love to give comment points out. And so right here, can you guys see this now?
No.
Oh, okay. On our website, let's see, I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna try to
share the screen.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah. So on our website, twinharborswaterkeeper.org, I have a whole list of talking points. And if you email me, or if you want to email Eleanor, I can provide her with 10 pages of talking points, and I'd be thrilled to do that.
Great. I'm gonna I just added a link to Twin Harbors Keeper into the chat comments.
Great.
And again, if anyone wants to email either one of us, you are welcome to, and in a moment I'll add my email in there. Now I gotta find my place in the comments. From Charles again, if it's 600 meters now in 10 years, cost can only go up. Probably very true.
Yeah, and you know, almost all dams have huge cost overruns, and this kind of dam is actually a new design. Like, you know, it's really interesting because the engineers, not only do they call it a FRE, but they often say that it's more like a bridge than a dam. And then there's maintenance. You know, it's a huge amount of maintenance, and the cost. Like, there's no benefit of this dam to people like me that live in the lower basin in Aberdeen. Absolutely none. And there's very little benefit to people that live in the South Fork of the Chehalis that got devastating flooding. So, you know, there's a couple inches of benefit to people that live in Montesano. You know, this is a huge valley and huge watershed, and it only seems right to do flood resiliency projects that benefit everyone. And, you know, those kind of projects are restoring the floodplain, moving people out of harm's way, maybe elevating I-5, you know, doing massive more culvert restorations, restoring the headwaters, for God's sakes. Like, you know, that is not addressed in the EIS. So, you know, how is it going to work to have a dam, but not restore those headwaters. You know, if we don't restore the headwaters, you know, flood resiliency is never going to work. And there I go, blabbing again.
No, it was great. I think there's one last question. So if folks have any other questions, please think about them and add them into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself after Lee's done answering this question. Carly asked, I might have missed this, but who has come out in support of the dam? Is there an organized pro-dam effort?
You know, I think the main, there's many people that live in the Centralia Chehalis area that are pro-dam. And there's many businesses that are pro-dam. And of course, you know, Lewis County is pro-dam, and the city of Chehalis and Centralia are pro-dam for the most part, people that live there. We've had there was 2 online public hearings to accept comments in April. And it was very interesting because at the last one, I think there was 50 comments that were against the dam and 3 or maybe 4 that were pro-dam. So I think most of the pro-dam sentiment is coming right from the area that will be offered the most protection, which is right around Centralia and Chehalis.
Thank you. Are there any other questions out there? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat box, and I'm not seeing any hands raised, and it doesn't seem like anyone's unmuting themselves to talk. So with that, thank you so much, Lee, and everyone who participated in this. I hope that you guys will consider and follow through on submitting a public comment on this important issue. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I did put my email as well as Lee's email into the chat box. You can probably also find us online. We have recorded this, so if you missed part of this, you will be able to view this again in the future. And thank you so much again, Lee, and it's been a pleasure.
Everyone. I love to blab about the river, and come down and paddle sometime.
Awesome. I'll probably definitely take you up on that offer.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thanks.
All right, good night.
Good night.